short and brotherly love around here.
How about you enforce the current law before you talk about changing any law?
This would be a very good time for you to shut up.
Don't you know me? Don't you know that that's an impossibility, that could never happen?
It is our time to do all we can do, and it's an urgent time.
Don't you know that?
And now, Burnie Thompson, where the golden age of radio lives on.
All right, I'm excited about today's show. We've got Mike Hill with us, and Mike Hill is a representative in the Florida House. And Mike Hill is a retired Air Force captain and one of my dear friends. He is a conservative. He's a strong conservative. Mike Hill gets an A+ rating with Americans for Prosperity. And when I see his posts on Facebook or on Twitter, or when he and I talk, you know what he's talking about? He's not talking about passing more laws. He's talking about states exerting their freedom and not being subjugated by the federal government. Mike Hill also happens to be the only conservative Republican who's black in the Florida legislature. And I am so glad to have him on. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Hey, Burnie, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thrilled to have you. There's a lot going on in the Florida House. There's 120 House members, 40 Senate members, and the last few years I've been a little disappointed, but there's a few good things going on, right? What are you focused on, Mike?
Burnie, I try to focus on what I call good public policy. And for me, good public policy consists of four things. Number one, is it constitutional? And the reason why that is number one and so important for me, Burnie, because just like you served in the Air Force, captain in the Air Force, you took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And you also recognize, Burnie, that when you left the military, as I did, you did not sign any piece of paper, and no one said you were released from that oath. All veterans who said that oath and make a lifetime commitment to protect and defend the Constitution. And so that's number one for me when I'm providing good public policy. Is it constitutional? Number two, is it fiscally responsible? You know, we have a budget of about $78 billion that has to be allocated amongst 20 million people who live in the state of Florida. You know, that's an awesome responsibility. That money should not be spent frivolously, should not be used to further your own political career, and it certainly shouldn't be used to help your business buddies. We call that capital cronyism. Mm-hmm. And then the third part is to consider what problem will that legislation fix. You know, it's interesting, Burnie, most of the legislation that we are running today, the majority of it, is because it's trying to correct some problem, some legislation that was passed 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, fixing problems that the government itself created, right?
That's right. That's right. But even then, I don't think enough thought is given into what their considered fix is for the problem they're trying to fix. Because you have to consider what effect will this have, what possible unintended consequences could happen, so that we're now going to have a problem 5, 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And then finally, Burnie, what I consider good public policy, is it morally sound? I mean, is it just the right thing to do? And so those four things, I think, make up good public policy. So the bills that I try to run, Burnie, I don't try to run a lot of fluff or a lot of feel-good things, but things that will actually make a difference in the lives of Floridians.
Now, I got three of them, Mike. I got, is it constitutional, is it fiscally responsible, and the final one was, is it morally sound, but I missed number 3.
What problem or problems will it fix?
I love it. You know what, Mike, what I love, and you know, I'm thrilled to tell people that you and I are friends. We spend time together outside of me being a talk show host and you being a representative, and you know, we did all we could to help you get elected. You represent the Pensacola area in Florida. And you are so consistent, Mike, and I told everybody you would be. And can I tell you, it feels great not to get my heart broken by you because, you know, and I don't know how you feel about it, but Steve Sutherland broke my heart, but Marco Rubio broke my heart, Rick Scott broke my heart, but you have been so sound and consistent. When I asked you what number 3 was, you knew what it was because you've been saying it even when you were campaigning, and you're still saying it today as a successful representative, and I salute you for that.
Thank you, Bernie. And I think the reason why I can be consistent is because I went to Tallahassee based on a set principles and set values. And if I were to veer from those, I'm not being truthful to myself, and it's time for me to come back home. So I don't get so concerned about, well, if I make this decision, it might be unpopular and I may get unelected. If that's the case, so be it. I'll go back to being a civilian again, but I have to stay true to those principles and values.
And you can always look yourself in the mirror. You also, Mike, happen to be one of Florida's delegates, right? If there was to be a convention of the states, you're going to be a player in that, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely, Bernie. There was a meeting just recently out at Salt Lake City, Utah. I was unable to attend that because it conflicted with me going down to Orlando for the Sunshine Summit, which brought all the presidential candidates to Florida. But we had a number of our delegates who did go out to Salt Lake City, Utah, and the whole purpose of that is laying the groundwork, the rules, that when we have an Article 5 of our Constitution says that when 34 states come together and say we want to amend our Constitution, that Congress must call a convention in order to do that. And so we were laying the groundwork. And I'll tell you, Bernie, it was a battle. And I'm so proud of the Florida delegation who went out there fighting against this very small but liberal faction of Democrats who were there, who were trying to make the votes of the delegates who would attend this convention proportional to the state population instead of one vote, one state. And the Florida delegates, we fought hard on that. We said, look, we will walk away from this if it is not one vote, one state. And we prevailed, and were able to get the votes passed that is one of the bedrock ground rules, that it's one vote, one state, and not proportional voting like California would get more than, let's say, Utah, or New York would get more than Virginia. We said, no way. It is one vote, one state.
Representative Mike Hill, state representative, a lot of what you do, and you're one of the very few people I see doing it, is you focus on exerting Florida's, sovereignty. As a free state, we will not be subjugated by the federal government, and especially not by this president. And you're very serious about that. You're very passionate about that, aren't you?
Absolutely, Bernie. I spoke out over a month ago on the refugee situation because I became aware that we actually have a refugee resettlement center here in Pensacola. It's run by the Council of Catholic Bishops, which is a part of Catholic Charities. And when I found out about it, at first I was curious, like, what are you guys doing? And then as I learned more about the program, I became incensed and said, no, we must stop this at all costs. And then when there was the attack over in Paris, I quickly contacted Governor Rick Scott and said, please be one of the governors that says you will not accept any Syrian refugees in Florida.
And on that same day, he did, didn't he?
He did. Yeah. He did later that day. Yep. And I was so grateful and thankful for that. And I'm so glad to see so many states step up. I think the last count was 36, states which have stepped forward and said, we will not accept Syrian refugees until we have a process in place to properly vet them. But I went a little further, Bernie. I didn't just say Syria. I said we should not accept refugees from any nation that sponsors, supports, or protects terrorism as a legitimate objective to get things done. I said any nation that does that, we should not accept citizens from them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some other important things going on in the state capitol I know of, and one of them is a representative who's close to you geographically, and that's Matt Gaetz. He's pushing the open carry bill. I believe Florida is one of only 4 states where we're not permitted by the government to carry a handgun openly. And this bill, I guess, if you have a concealed permit, if you've gone through that process, you would be able to carry openly a sidearm. And what's your position on that? It just passed a major hurdle, didn't it?
Yes, I am fully supportive of that bill, and I'm glad Representative Gates brought it forward. And, interestingly, Burnie, Florida previously did have an open carry law here in Florida. It wasn't until, I think, under Governor Childs that it was repealed. But now we're going to bring it back. I feel confident it's going to pass the House. It'll be more difficult over in the Senate, but I believe we're going to get it done over there, too. And Governor Scott will sign this into law. I think is great. And there's another bill out there to allow, and I forget at this time who is sponsoring it, which will allow students on campus to also carry their weapons. You have to be at least 21 years old, already have your concealed weapons permit, but you will be able to carry your protection on colleges and universities in Florida.
Well, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it, to change things so that colleges are no longer gun-free zones? Because when we have these mass shootings, I call them gun-free zone shootings because that's what they are. I don't call them mass shootings, or I call them gun-free zone shootings. And if we fix that so that colleges are no longer gun-free zones, which are really fish in a barrel environments, I think that's going to be a great development.
Absolutely, Burnie. I have 2 children who go to University of West Florida. My son, who's a senior now, my daughter, who's a junior. Now, my daughter sometimes have classes at night. So as she is leaving a class and walking to her car, I want anyone who's even thinking about something sinister to stop and ponder and think, she might have a weapon on her, and this could not turn out well. If anything is going to deter, I believe, some of the attacks that we see on our college campuses.
So you want her to have more than a whistle?
Oh, that's right. That's
It's
right.
absurd, isn't it? So, Mike, what about some of the biggest issues facing Florida are the ones that are always there, and the James Madison Institute over there near you in Tallahassee now. Bob McClure, Dr. Bob McClure, the great free market guy who runs that, he always calls the Medicaid the Pac-Man of the budget because it's more than a third, I believe, of Florida's budget. What are we going to do to keep Medicaid from gobbling up Florida's budget?
Well, you spoke very highly of Bob McClure, Dr. Bob McClure, and the James Madison Institute, and I do also, Burnie. That's a great organization.
Terrific. They are.
They're a conservative, constitutional-minded think tank. And Florida took a big step last year by not expanding Obamacare Medicaid in Florida. And there was one reason why we had to break early from our normal session, because the Senate wanted to expand Medicaid in Florida. And we just could not see it over on the House side. It didn't make sense economically. As you said, Burnie, it is a huge part of our budget right now. And it would have continued to have grown if we had done that. It didn't even make sense socially. And what I mean by that is there was a condition on this expansion that said that we had to accept in this expansion able-bodied, unworking adults. So we responded back to Washington. We said, now, wait a minute. We have people on the waiting list who are blind and disabled, who Medicaid is intended for. If we were to expand, can't we expand them first before these able-bodied, non-working adults? The answer was no.
Yeah, the federal government said no way.
That's right. And so you know that their whole purpose is to get someone subject to them, someone dependent on them, so they'll continue to vote for them. And we were not going to play that game. So it was beyond me why on earth the Senate side wanted to expand Medicaid. It didn't make sense economically.
And it's very disappointing considering they're majority Republicans as well. The House has been more conservative in the Florida legislature than the Senate, and I'm grateful. And we're speaking with Mike Hill, representative in the House, a Republican from the Pensacola area. Mike, I just saw on Facebook Governor Scott taking a strong stand rather, to oppose the funding of Planned Parenthood. I know that you agree with him on that. How would that work?
Well, I think that's awesome. What I had also written Governor Scott a letter about that and asked him to defund Planned Parenthood. First, just to clarify some things, Burnie, the state of Florida itself does not send, well, let me take that back. They do send some money to Planned Parenthood. It comes to about $1 million. But there are strings attached to it saying you cannot use it for doing an abortion. So, and they have to send us documentation back showing what it is used for.
But we do,
However,
but we do know, Mike. I mean, you and I and everybody knows that what they do is they shift funds. If they get $1 million that from the government they don't use for abortion, that frees up $1 million of their own that they can.
Well, that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
that's true, Bernie. And then, but from the Medicaid side, coming into the state, it is in the I don't want to over-exaggerate, but I know it's at least in the tens of millions of dollars that is funneled through Medicaid, then down to Planned Parenthood. And so what Governor Scott is doing, God bless him, is that we are stopping that. It is not going to go to Planned Parenthood through Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. This is what frustrates me about this, is Republicans did this. It was the Republican House under John Boehner, my former representative, Steve Sutherland, who is now a lobbyist in D.C. Steve Sutherland voted to fund Planned Parenthood. We said, please don't do that. And he used that same reasoning. It's not going to go to abortions. Well, okay, it went to chopping up babies and selling them, for God's sake. They should never get government funds. And we could go back to your four points of good public policy. It's not constitutional. It's not fiscally responsible. It doesn't solve any problem. And it's certainly not morally sound. And so it frustrates me that we now have to fight against something that Republicans of all people brought us, but I'm grateful that you are. Mike, look, you weren't always, though, a conservative. You are one of the strongest, most articulate, and genuine conservatives that I know, and I know firsthand. But you weren't always that way, were you? When did you change?
I'll tell you, Bernie, you're absolutely right. When I graduated from the Air Force Academy, I was proud to be called a liberal. Now, I will admit, I didn't quite understand what the term meant. I thought liberal meant that you're progressive, you're always looking to the future, you always want things better. It's not that I so much embrace those policies that keep people in bondage, such as food stamps and Medicaid and all that. It was that I thought that being a liberal meant that you were not going to be stuck in the past, that you're always looking forward and so forth. So I said, yeah, people will call me a liberal. I say, that's right, I am. But it was Ronald Reagan, when he got elected, his first term, I'm listening to him. I wasn't convinced, but it was during his second term, and almost simultaneously I was going to school at night working on my MBA. And I said, now, wait a minute. The things I'm reading in my books, my scholastic books, that make sense economically, Ronald Reagan is implementing those, and it's working. And I said, and besides, I agree with him on the social policies, too. Like, I was against abortion. I was against Medicaid and food stamps and everything he was doing in those areas. And I said, I am a conservative. It was like a light bulb came on. I wouldn't change my registration, and I've been, as you say, a staunch conservative ever since.
And it's amazing. I find the strongest, really the strongest conservatives are the ones who used to be liberals. I was a 23-year-old Marxist. You and I know very well their arguments. And one of the things I love that John Stuart Mill, one of my favorite philosophers, John Stuart Mill, said, he said, if you only know one side of the argument, you don't even know that very well. So you and I know both sides of the argument, and I think that's a very, very important aspect of a strong conservative.
Absolutely, Bernie, because then when they try to begin their arguments, we're familiar with them. And we know the pitfalls of those arguments, and so we can counter them very easily.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe, Mike, for a moment, I thought you might have been a liberal when you were at the Air Force Academy because maybe you got hit one too many times as a champion boxer, which you were. But then I remembered you didn't get hit that many times so you can't blame it on that.
No, I didn't like getting hit, Bernie. I stayed out of the way. I did the hitting.
You know, I tried to tell some people about this. because it's some of my favorite stuff that you and I talk about when we enjoy each other's company. You, when you were in the Air Force Academy, were there at the same time as my favorite entertainer's son. He was in the Air Force Academy with you too. Dean Martin, right? What was his son's name? Dean Martin Jr.?
Dean Paul Martin. Yes, and he was a junior. But no, he did not attend the Air Force Academy with me, Bernie. He and I went to pilot training together.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a part of a program back then where the Air Force was promoting itself and as a way of trying to attract people, that they would get celebrities to come into the Air Force. And Dean Martin's son was a part of my pilot training class. He went on to graduate, was flying F-4s, and as you know, unfortunately, he had an accident, and the plane flew into a mountain out in California.
Yeah, it broke Dean Martin's heart as well. Dean Martin was, it happened, I believe, in 19, let me think here, it happened in around 1987 is when it happened in the San Gorgonio Mountains, I think, of California, and broke Dean Martin's heart. And Dean died in 1995 on Christmas Day, actually, but the loss of him. And he was a really nice guy, wasn't he? You tell stories about him. Will you share the story about how he wore his uniform?
Oh, yeah. I did know him because we lived in the same apartment complex together, and of course being in the same class, but we had our flight uniforms. Everyone knows what a flight suit looks like.
Right.
Well, Dean Martin would flip his collar up so that it would look different, or I guess in his mind look cool, but he did not wear his uniform the way most of us did. Actually, it was kind of out of regulation. Not kind of, it was out of regulation for him to flip his collar up, but it was Dean Martin, so they let him do it.
Right, and some of the other guys wanted to try and do a little bit of that, and they didn't get away with it, did they?
No, yeah.
Well,
Representative
Mike Hill, before I let you go, let us know how we can find you, how we can help you, and what you think we as citizens could be doing to expand freedom and protect the family budget with you.
Well, thank you, Bernie. But the best way to find me would be at my website, which is mike.hill@myfloridahouse.gov. That's the best place to reach me, mike.hill@myfloridahouse.gov, because our executive staff looks at that all the time also, so if I tend to miss something, they catch it.
All right, and they can, I'm pretty sure they can search you online, Mike Hill, Florida Legislature, and find your official page.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they'll find me there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'm up for re-election in 2016, and they could go to hill4house.com, and they'll find me there and see how I stand on certain policies and positions. Bernie, I would say I'm running a couple of very important bills this session, and one in particular I think you will really like. We're calling it Andy's Law. And what it does is it provides civil remedies for those who are the victim of terrorist attacks.
Mm.
You know, right now, if you're attacked by a terrorist, if they don't blow themselves up and they're arrested and put in jail, that's the end of it. And here you are suffering still with your injuries or the harm that they caused. What my bill will allow you to do is bring civil charges against the perpetrator of the terrorist attack and those who financed them.
Fantastic.
So we can start going after pocketbooks.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mike, what about the VA? I mean, you in Pensacola, the area that you represent, the U.S. representative there, Jeff Miller, he's one of the guys in Washington who's supposed to be looking out for the VA. Are we doing anything to help veterans? And I saw some of the stuff that the Florida House was putting out. We're going to make it the friendliest place for veterans in the country, and this, that, and the other. To which you saw my response: how about Florida start making U.S. citizens feel like we're welcome more than illegal aliens and so on and so forth? Because we've had some terrible laws come through lately. Let's treat all Americans equally and not put veterans above citizens. But darn it, when somebody serves his country and he needs medical care from the VA, this needs to be improved. Is there anything that you guys are trying to do about that?
Well, Bernie, at the state level, we can't, because as you know, the VA administration is a federal program. Mm-hmm. However, I was recently talking to a Senate candidate for U.S. Senate who wants to take over Marco Rubio's seat. And I won't say the candidate's name because I don't want someone to think that I'm endorsing anyone at this time, because I'm not.
Okay.
But what I heard was that there is legislation going through at the congressional level right now, and this is what they are going to propose and support should they get elected, that a veteran will be given a card, let's call it by any other name, and they can use that card for medical services at any hospital. Doesn't have to just be at a VA hospital where the waiting list is so long, especially for some critical care.
Yeah.
So they'll take that card, can go to any hospital, use it there, and that hospital will get reimbursed for the services. I think that's the answer to that whole problem.
That's good stuff. And Representative Mike Hill, I know you believe this, and I just want to share it with people so that we get the word out. You believe in what's known as the anti-commandeering doctrine, and what that is it states have the constitutional right, and it's also been affirmed in the Supreme Court that states do not have to use our resources to enforce federal acts, federal laws, especially ones that are not constitutional. We can say, look, we're not, for example, Sheriff Richard Mack in 1997 defeated Bill Clinton in a Supreme Court case because they wanted him to use his state resources to enforce the Brady Bill. And he believed in the Second Amendment. He said, we are not using our resources, and it was affirmed in the Supreme Court that states don't have to be commandeered by the federal government to use their resources to enforce federal acts. That's yet another way that states can assert their sovereignty, that we're not to be subjugated by the federal government. That's something I'm sure that you believe in as well, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, Bernie. And I think that was another thing which was so important in our argument to not expand Medicaid here in Florida, because it would have meant us expending state funds for that. We said, we're not doing it. So absolutely, I believe in, Bernie, I'm such a strong believer in the 10th Amendment, which says the power belongs to the states and to the people.
That's awesome.
What a lot of people don't recognize is the 9th Amendment and what it says. The 9th Amendment says that any power that is not enumerated or spelled out that belongs to the government, if it's not in this document, it doesn't mean that you have it.
Mm-hmm. In other words, all the rights in the universe belong to the people, and don't construe the Constitution to say if it's not in there, the people don't have that right. It's not that kind of relationship.
That's right. That's right. Our Constitution is phenomenal, Bernie, but what it did was, for the first time in history, it says that people are going to be placed at the top and government at the bottom. That had never happened before. It was always some king, some dictator, some government agency or entity that was at the top telling people what to do. But our Constitution was an exception to that rule. That is what makes the United States of America such an exceptional nation. Just by the definition of the word, we are exceptional, because we do not follow the rule. The people come first, not the government. The people are on top. However, that seems to be lost on this current administration and Congress also, and we must assert our rights and take it back, Bernie.
I sure want more people like you, and I'm going to do all I can to get more people like you in office. Mike Hill, Representative Mike Hill, the Florida legislature, because you and I both know that the rule of law has been supplanted by the law of rulers, and I'm so glad you're there tapping them on the shoulder at every turn, telling them that you're with the people.
Bernie, it is my honor to serve, and I will fight with all my might to make sure that the Constitution is adhered to because of that oath that I took and the same one that you took, Bernie.
Well, God bless you. Mike Hill, thanks for being a good friend of the show and to me.
Thank you, Bernie. God bless you.
God bless you. Now, wasn't that fun? That is what we need more of. Wouldn't it be great if there's 120 representatives in the state of Florida? Wouldn't it be great to have 80 guys like that? And I'll tell you what, he is a special guy. You can find him on Twitter, too, by the way, if you go to @MikeHillFL for Florida, @MikeHillFL. I hope you'll follow him on Twitter. You can find him on Facebook as well. He pretty much uses his Facebook page as an all-around thing, so I think he accepts friends there too. But and find his official page he was telling you about as well. All right, that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for being with me. I'm Burnie Thompson, and I will see you again on Monday. on My Freedom Radio, and of course on Periscope. I see you there on Periscope, on YouTube Live, and on Fox 28. Thank you so much, and I'll see you tomorrow, or Monday rather.